Welcome back to the Redeem podcast. Just a quick reminder, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about me and about the Redeem podcast, we have a newsletter. If you would like to subscribe to the newsletter, I will put the link in the show notes. So far, those newsletters have been going out every other week or so, and they're very short. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of information. If you would like to learn more and you want to subscribe, please go to the show notes at the end of this episode and hit the subscribe button. Have you ever found yourself struggling through life's unexpected twists, wondering, this isn't what I planned or hoped for? If so, you're not alone. Life rarely goes as expected, even when we think we've mapped it all out. Psalms 107:2, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe. Welcome to the Redeem podcast, a place of encouragement and hope. Through honest conversations and powerful interviews, we'll explore incredible stories of transformation and resilience, even in the face of the impossible. I'm Lauren Burns, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Well, you are in for a treat. I met Michelle Steiner, and I felt like she was telling me parts of my own story. Michelle, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on and sharing about your learning disabilities. You were telling me about working in the schools and after having learning disabilities and challenges, people telling you you're not going to be able to go to college, you're not going to be able to have the career you want because of your learning disabilities. But God, right? Like he showed up and he provided for you. The day before you shared that with me, my sweet niece is going through some of the same stuff. And she was telling me that she's trying to get a job at a school, being a paraprofessional. I got on the phone with my sister and I'm like, you're not going to believe the conversation I just had. I really do feel like it was a God thing that you were just sort of speaking life into my niece. You're in Pennsylvania, we're in Texas, but isn't that cool? God just connects. So, Michelle, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on and sharing about your learning disabilities.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here today.
Michelle was telling me a little bit about her childhood, and that's something we have in common. Back when I was growing up, learning disability, no one talked about. Michelle, at what age were you diagnosed, and what did that look like in your household for you?
I was diagnosed whenever I was in kindergarten. I had a preschool teacher that thought some things were going on, and she recommended another year of preschool, but I don't know if that really would have worked. My parents, I was an only child for 13 years. I was their first child. They didn't have a whole lot to base development on. They thought, okay, well, she'll go to kindergarten, she'll catch up, everything will be fine. My teacher really noticed that I was struggling in the classroom. Simple things, doing simple math was really hard. I couldn't tie my shoes at that age. It was really difficult for me. I also struggled with dot to dot pages. I can remember that being a challenge. I remember I would get them and I thought, oh, this is easy. I'm doing it correctly. And when I got it back, I didn't do it right. And they suggested to my parents that I get tested for having a learning disability. Sure enough, I do. That was when they gave that as an umbrella term. They didn't give a specific diagnosis. They didn't even tell me dyscalculia, but they knew I wasn't going to be a math genius. I also struggled socially in the classroom too. I honestly think being an only child, though, that was part of it because I was so used to being around adults. The frustration that they could see on my face was really evident because I kind of said things how they were, and people could know that I was very, very upset over that. And I had to repeat kindergarten the following year in a different school in our district. It was still a public school, but I just had to go into a different one. I began to receive specialty services in all areas. They wanted me to learn how to read really well, even though I had stronger reading skills. And we worked on handwriting and we attempted to do math. And that was really hard. And eventually I was in regular ed classes for science and social studies and reading. I still had to go for specialty instruction for math, and I had accommodations such as the test being read aloud and having extra time on tests. And I think it was also really hard on my parents because my dad was really great with math. He's like, well, what do you mean she's not going to be able to understand this? They assured him. They said she's just not going to get how math works. My mom and dad, they didn't give up on me. They fought for me to have accommodations in the classroom. They also studied with me at home. Sometimes that was some very long, tearful homework sessions. That was frustrating. but they made me go to school, even though when I wasn't going to do well on a test or an assignment, or I was having difficulty with my peers because I was bullied from very early on in my childhood.
Michelle, that's what I was going to ask you. I remember those days sitting in a classroom and just feeling really stupid. I was pulled out of my math class and I went to the special class and I was embarrassed and I was ashamed. I was the kid that would like sink down in my seat and hope that the teacher, this is when we had chalkboards. I would hope that they didn't choose me to work a problem because I thought if I stand up and work a problem, everyone's going to know how dumb I really am. I still remember how that felt. Like you said, sitting at that table with my mom crying and she's crying. How did that affect you? Did you go through some of those same things as a kid?
I can remember when I was very young, I wondered what good could come out of this because I thought my life, I was in despair. I thought my life was always going to be a struggle and I couldn't learn and I wasn't that smart. One of the things that, and I can just see how God has worked in my life from the time I was very young. I can remember it got really bad socially whenever I was in high school. You have the really defined peer groups, and everybody
Yeah.
seems to have a friend, and they're all connected. And I just couldn't fit in with anybody. And there was a faith-based art group that met just right outside of my school district, and I got a chance to join that, and I found acceptance with other peers that they had the same interest that I did, and I could shed that reputation of being the outcast that followed me from the time I was young, and I got the added bonus of knowing who God was. I was
Mm.
raised Catholic. I accepted Christ at a very young age, but and my parents were very open to other denominations, but we didn't. But my parents raised me as a Catholic, and I didn't see God as this loving or relationship. I saw a lot of rules and a lot of guilt that was associated with it. When I was with this faith-based group, I got to see God in a totally different way, and I could just see how that was just really planting a lot of seeds for my life for what I was going to do. Ultimately led me to another group of friends that was an adult writing group. 20 some years later, we still meet once a month to talk about our writing. They got to watch me grow as not only a writer, but as a person as well.
Now, Michelle, educate me a little bit. That's pretty impressive when you say a writing group. A part of my dyslexia is spelling and writing is not good for me. Did you have that as well, or was the writing and the spelling easy for you?
The writing was easy for me. The spelling, occasionally, there are some words I cannot spell, but I can use Grammarly and things or spell check, thank goodness. But that came a lot, that did come a little bit easier for me than the math did. I could study the words and be able to understand them. And the reading was a lot easier. That was one of the first things they found out I was good at. I wrote a story about a dinosaur when I was in third grade, and my dad saw it. He said, "Wow, this is really good." That just gave me all that encouragement. I thought, oh, I'm good at something. I started to write more. I would read, and reading was always something I loved to do. My dad read to me from the time I was very little every night. That came easy to me. I did struggle with reading comprehension, but I could identify words. I knew how the English language worked. Probably what I do struggle with my writing is sometimes grammar. I might not put a comma in the right place, and sometimes I might speak in a passive voice. So, but there is some apps that can show me whenever, okay, I'm doing this, and thank God for editors.
Thank goodness, right? All of the things that we have now that I didn't have, in school, all of the
Mhm.
spell check and the calculators and all the things, but just that shame and the embarrassment that goes along with any disability. We're talking about learning disabilities right now, but
Right.
any disability, and it's like you're not good enough. You
Yeah.
aren't going to be able to accomplish the dreams and the passions that you have because you have that thing. But we know, believing in Jesus, that if God has a plan and a purpose for your life, he will see you through it. It might be hard. You might have to work a little extra, but if he has that plan and if you pray and you seek after him, he's going to
Mhm.
walk you through. I'd love if you explained from
Mhm.
your experience the difference. I was not raised Catholic. I've always like been raised in the Christian faith. So what would you say, and I've heard that before, the biggest difference for you personally having Jesus in your life as a Catholic than you saying that you found this faith-based group and you're like, I want to know that kind of a relationship.
Being Catholic, it's still a Christian denomination.
Yes.
But a lot of what it was based upon was a lot of rules. There is a lot of things that are rules within the church, which that works for a lot of people. I
Mhm.
have some very sweet family members where that's how they feel close to Jesus. For me, I felt like it was more guilt, or if you didn't do something
Uh,
the right way, or you were shamed, or things like that. And the way I viewed salvation was also very different. I can remember when I was taking our first communion class, and the teacher told us a couple of things that I don't necessarily agree with. There's a mortal sin and there's venial sins. And if you commit this one sin, if you commit a mortal sin, you're not going to ever be forgiven. And if you commit a venial sin, okay, you go to confession, God forgives you. I
mm,
just always thought, oh, what if I commit that one and God doesn't forgive me?
yeah.
I didn't have that thing where I could feel that I could be forgiven. And that led
Mm,
to a lot of fear. And
mm,
another thing I don't agree with, this is not to bash any Catholics
no,
that are
no.
out there, but I can remember the teacher said that Christ sinned twice. There was a lot of things that I was hearing that just didn't really match up to what I believed in. And I just thought, okay, we went to mass. This is really not exciting. This is not something I
Mhm.
want to do. You're going because your parents are having you go.
Yeah.
But when I started to see Jesus as this person, I could go to him if I sinned anything, as long as I asked for forgiveness. God could forgive that and can redeem a lot of those situations.
Mhm.
And I saw that for something, and I was really struggling in one thing. And I talked to one of the leaders years ago. She was praying with me, and she said, God, show Michelle how beautiful she is. And I was really struggling with my self confidence at that
Mm.
time. And I said, you were one of the first people that really, I was going through this. And she goes, I don't remember saying that. She
Oh,
goes, that
wow.
was God speaking through me.
Wow. That's really cool. God knows exactly what you need to hear. It
Yeah.
goes back to what we were talking about, that shame and
Mhm.
that insecurity in school, and it just sort of travels with you. I think a lot of what you just said, there's a lot of people that have gone through church hurt, any kind of
Yeah.
denomination, but it's about
Right.
having a relationship with Jesus. It's about being in God's word, picking up the Bible. What
Yeah.
does the Bible say instead of
Right.
what's our interpretations, right? And having
Hmm.
that relationship with God. And that's what you did. So for anyone that's listening, that's, hey, I've done the church thing. I don't want all
Yeah.
those rules and regulations, or a pastor really hurt my feelings, or, there's all kinds of things because we're humans, we're going to mess it up.
Yeah.
But God's just waiting for you to come back to him, right? And be like, I'm waiting for you to have a relationship with me.
Yep.
So, Michelle, your high school years, what was your counselors at school? Were they walking you through some of the learning disabilities? What was that like?
I had a learning support teacher who told me, I don't think you can go to college because of your disability. She suggested a trade school, and nothing there really interested me. I did get some help with Office for Vocational Rehabilitation. I had someone that came into me and spoke my junior year. We sat down and talked about what I wanted to do, and they explained what their agency was. And I said, I'd like to go to college, but I am a little fearful about that. I want to study early childhood education. They said, we think that's a possibility. It's like, wow, okay. I never really heard a whole lot about how this could be. And I said, why? I haven't even taken the SATs or ACTs or anything like that. And they said, well, why don't we just try doing a community college and just see how that would work out and get one that had disability accommodations. I also went to a college fair that they had all kinds of different schools that had accommodations too in
Mhm,
colleges. I was just like, wow, I never heard of anything like this. I also had a teacher that was a student teacher that year in learning support who told me, you can go to college. You know how to study. Her voice is what I don't remember her name. I wish I did because I would love to thank her. But sometimes that was a voice that I heard when I got to community college, and it was really difficult.
mhm.
And along the journey, too, before I even got there, I had to get tested for having a learning disability all over again through
Yes,
OVR.
yes.
And I've never been a great test taker.
No.
And yeah, I scored really low. And the person who evaluated, the psychiatrist said, I don't think you're going to go beyond community college.
Mhm,
I get to community college, there's a ton of stigma. My peers thought the disability accommodations were cheating and made a
yep,
lot of comments.
mhm,
I've also had professors, one in particular, that said, you're going to have limited job choices when you graduate. And people who would say, oh, no, we don't use calculators. We use our heads, our brains to think.
Mhm.
And because of all this stigma, I didn't use the accommodations, and that was a really big
Oh,
mistake for me.
yeah.
My grades, they dropped even lower. And I can just remember being really frustrated. And then everybody's telling you, well, it's going to get better, or you just have to try harder, or you could do better. And I was doing the best I could, but if you're not using the accommodations, it's just a harder battle for you.
Mhm.
And finally, there was a professor in a class who was really struggling in the science class. And she said, why don't we at least get you extended test time? And I did that. And I didn't do well in her class, but I passed it. And that's all I needed to do.
Mhm.
And I was able to pass my other classes. I moved out on my own, and life was good. I started going to another church that I found that I liked, and I was on my own, and I was able to be able to live in a central location, which was amazing because I'm not able to drive, and I loved it. But and I was doing some temp jobs, but I always wanted more for myself, and I wondered where my purpose was
Mm.
because I can remember going to a baptism, and the preacher was talking about, oh yeah, God's plan for this child, and I thought, well, where is my good plan at? Where is all this going?
Mhm.
Then God decided that okay, you're going to move back in with your parents for financial reasons, and that made me feel even worse because
Mm.
here I am back at home, still not married, still not going forward with my career. My job was downsizing, but I just felt this pull from God to go back to school. I found the perfect program that had the least amount of math and science possible.
Yes.
It had disability accommodations. And God spoke to me this saying, you're not, everyone was telling me around me, oh, yeah, you're going to have student loans. You're going to have student loans. God said, no, you're not. Even though I was on the phone with OVR with them saying, oh, no, we're probably not going to pay for this. This isn't going to work. And I'm like, all right, I'll go forward. I have faith. I went forward with it, expecting, okay, maybe I heard it wrong. I was able to graduate debt free.
It's
And
amazing.
I had disability accommodations on campus. I made sure that I used them.
Mhm.
I advocated for myself. I even made Dean's List for a semester.
That's amazing.
I could have done any of that without God.
Mhm.
He just really opened up so many doors. He even opened up a ride for me because the campus was a half an hour away, and my parents both worked at the time, and I couldn't drive. And everyone would say, "Why don't you move in on campus?" I thought, well, no, I knew that would be probably the one where I would be paying a lot of
Yeah.
loans even today for. My mom went to church and she was talking with a relative, and she goes, "Oh, I'll give her a ride. I work on campus."
Wow, that's
So
awesome.
all of that came together for me.
Mhm.
Yeah,
All every little step of the way.
yeah.
That's what God does. He when you pray and you act out in faith, God's going to show up in the impossible. Michelle, you what year was this when you were in college?
When I was in community college, it was late 90s, early
Okay.
2000s.
I'm pretty impressed with all that you knew, like, that people were coming and telling you about the accommodations. I didn't have that. That was not my
Yeah.
experience. My stepfather actually was an amputee above the knee. Amputee lost his leg driving in Texas. We call it Texas Rehabilitation Commission. I think they've changed the
Mhm.
name. But they helped my dad go back to school because
Yeah.
it's any disability, physical or learning,
Mhm.
so that's why my mom knew about that, and she thought, "I wonder if they help with learning disabilities." So my mom actually was the one that sought out that help for me. Same thing, and I love my high school counselor, but she was like, "Lauren, you're never gonna be able to be a physical therapist. You're never going to be able to get a master's degree. You're not gonna be able to pass the GRE. Your test scores are so bad," which was true. Your
Mhm.
GPA, all the things, you're not gonna be able. Same like you're saying, Michelle, is like, I could have let those words push me down more, but I'm like, "No, this is the passion that God's given me," and I had a mom that was, like, rooting me on, like, "You can do anything you put your mind to." Texas Rehabilitation Commission, they helped pay for my books, half my
Yep.
tuition, and
Mhm.
anything that it took to get a career. So if you're listening and you're in different states, I'll try to put that in the show notes to help you.
Right.
Their job is to help you get a job. So whatever the schooling looks like, is that correct, Michelle? Any testing you have
Yes.
to take, they help you financially pay for those things so that way you can have a career and you can be independent and live on your own.
Exactly. They pay for that, and they even pay for the testing because sometimes somebody might come in and they might have some issues and maybe they don't indeed have a disability. Most people that are going in for a lot of those testing, they do indeed have something. And
Mhm.
it is, yeah, they'll help pay for that. They pay for school, they can pay for books, they can pay for the expenses that you need. So you're able to go on and they'll help you with writing up a plan too. That
Mhm.
is another
Yes.
thing that they will do, and they'll do an individual service plan with them, and they can even help you with getting the right accommodations that you need. I know that's one of the things that was a double-edged sword whenever I went in and had to get tested for a learning disability again. But I could take the accommodations that the psychiatrist recommended, and
Mhm.
it's usually the same: vocational rehabilitation, having a note taker, it's an extended test time.
And using a
That
calculator. Back
Yep,
then, I guess
calculating
everyone
pieces.
gets to do that now, but back then I had to have a little thing, and I went through the
Yeah.
same thing. People are like, "Well, you're cheating or you get extra help." I remember having to leave the class to go to an isolated room for
Mhm.
extra
Yeah.
testing, and there's some shame in that, but you swallow your pride. I know, Michelle, you know what it's like. With a learning
Mhm.
disability, you have to work so much harder.
Yep.
It's so much harder, it's so much more studying. I don't know if you did this, but I would teach my dog. You said that you have cats, is that correct? I
I
always said
do.
my dog was the smartest dog in the neighborhood because I was teaching that dog all the anatomy and all the things.
Right, I studied with my mom a lot too. It was nice when I had a note taker because my handwriting, you can't read it, but my note takers, you could.
Yep.
And I also, something that I would do when I went to university is I would work out before I would go to class or before I
Mm,
took a test. And that just as long as I worked out, I ate, had a cup of coffee, my brain just worked a lot better.
mhm,
And that just helped with the cognition and memory. Those were some things. And sometimes I do have to read things out loud and talk out loud to myself. People sometimes will be like, why are you talking to yourself? And I'm thinking, well, I'm trying to work through this problem, and it works better for me if I sometimes hear things aloud.
mhm,
That it's just finding those ways, because a lot of times people who know me say, well, you must have overcome your disability because you have a bachelor's degree, or you got that random question right, or you've been working. I haven't overcome the disability. I've just found ways to be able to manage it and to
mhm.
be able to problem solve.
I think you're more compassionate and
Mm-hmm.
understanding because of all that you walk
Yep.
through, and God uses all those things too. Man, talk about perseverance. It's almost like, "Hey, if
Mm-hmm.
you tell me I can't do it, watch out and let me show you."
Yeah, exactly. I can do that. It's just I might need a different way to do it. And some things
Mhm,
that just may not happen, and that's okay too. God
mhm,
uses a lot of those things. I can even see that at my job. All the kids know, do not ask me for help with math. I cannot do that. And I have to say that to staff too, that I can't do certain things. What that sometimes does is it shows a lot of the kids that, okay, somebody that there's an adult in the classroom, they can't do everything. That person
mhm,
has a disability, they've been successful. It gives me those little windows of time go with a kid and share my story and
mhm.
show them how to advocate. Just sometimes when I was really frustrated, I know I had a situation where I told them I can't do math and they expected me to do that in the classroom. And I just looked at the sky and I said, God, why am I here? Why do you have me here? I can't do this. Somebody said, Mrs. Steiner, somebody's crying. And I
Oh,
looked over and there was a student that was frustrated because he couldn't do the assignment. And I got on eye level with him and I said, I know how hard this is. I can't help you because I have a math disability, but if you need help, I want you to tell me and I'll give you the resources for someone to help you. Sure enough, before I knew it, he was asking for help and he was working independently at the end of the year. And in that moment, I just heard this voice saying, see, that's why you're here. I didn't want you to teach him math, but I wanted you to show him to be that resource for him.
that's way better than being able to know how to do the math problems. I wish I had a Mrs. Steiner in my life when I was going through high school, as much as I love my counselor, but having you say, "Hey, Lauren, I struggled with this too, and let's figure out another way," instead of saying, "You're never gonna be able to do that. Find something
Yeah,
else." And
exactly.
God's gonna use you in such a cool, mighty way because that's what our kids, our students, adults, that's what we need is just that encouragement. So tell us about how did you get into your career? You went through college, you persevered through all of that.
I did find some jobs and after college, and they said they were disability friendly, but they weren't. I went, there was a call for an opening that was for a permanent part-time paraprofessional. When I thought, okay, I'm going to go for this job. I thought, oh, they're just going to put me on the sub list. It's not going to be anything permanent. God had other plans. There was a permanent part time position, and I've been doing that ever since.
Mhm.
That's been a real blessing to be able to help out students, be able to have a job, be able to feel like I'm making a difference. I often thought, okay, how can I with a disability? And God's shown a lot of different ways that I have been able to do that with my job. I started as a one on one aide for a student who was visually impaired, and I did that for a few years. Eventually, just God led me to getting into the general ed curriculum with middle schoolers. I've had some students who have visual impairments. I also work with students with other disabilities as well. It's just always an awesome opportunity to be able to give back and so rewarding. Another thing that I have always loved was writing and reading and speaking. And I had that chance a couple years ago to be able to write about life with a learning disability. I finally got that courage because I had friends that were telling me, oh, you should write about having a disability. For my writers group, I thought, oh, no, that's too personal. I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
But God had other plans. And one of the things that was just the start of everything, I can remember I moved into a house after I got married. I couldn't open the door up with my limited hand dexterity in both of my hands. There was a prompt on the Mighty, what's a seemingly easy task for other people, but it's really hard for you with your disability. And I wrote about it. I had such a great response to that article that encouraged me, I want to write more.
Mhm.
And I got more things published on the Mighty, and I got more articles published in other places. And I wanted to start my own blog and put my photography that I take from my walks, from all the pictures of my flowers. And just, I'm just amazed at how God has used that not only to help me, but to help other people. Because a lot of times people will come to me and say, that's my story. I
Mhm.
thought I was the only one who struggled with that. But now I know that I'm not alone.
That's why I was at my son's swim meet and in
Yep.
tears on the phone, because I'm listening. I feel like I'm listening to my own story. And really, honestly, Michelle, I haven't met a whole lot of people that have that same story. So I think that's why it had that effect on me because when you're like, "Oh, she gets it." It's a big
Yeah.
deal. It's a big deal. What would you say to the person listening that maybe they recognize and maybe schools are way better now and they're picking up on it
Mhm.
better than it was when I was a kid, but to the parent that sees a child struggling, it's like, "I do need to get my kid tested." Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe they're not just lazy. What would you say are the good steps for them to do?
The first step that I would recommend for the parent is to reach out to the child's general ed teacher and talk to them and see what's going on in the classroom. Most of us, we have a lot of students that come in that aren't diagnosed, and sometimes you wonder, oh my goodness, why is this child not have an IEP or a 504 plan? So I think sometimes talking with the teacher and seeing what they're noticing. It's also reaching out to and going forward with talking to the school psychologist, the guidance counselor, whatever, or even the principal, and just saying, I want to have my child tested for having a disability. I think that's always a good first step. And if the school is not helping out with that, like you feel that they should, you can also talk with your child's pediatrician. That's always a good resource too, some of their concerns. It's also a good thing if there's an intermediate unit or another advocacy group that might be in your state or in your community, and talking to them and saying, I've talked to the school. I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. I've talked to the pediatrician. They think something is going on. A lot of times they can do some advocacy work, and they might be aware of some other resources to help get that diagnosis and just to advocate for your child, because that's so important, because not every school does the job that they're supposed to do, and sometimes we don't always get it right, and it's just important that parents don't give up on their kids.
Mhm. I could think of the depression, the anxiety, the
Hmm.
frustration. Anger. I was a people pleaser, emotional girl, but then you could also
Right.
have some that are hard-headed and angry. Those emotions come
Yeah.
out all kinds of ways and just thinking I'm stupid and the struggles that kids have. So, you gave us some great resources, pediatrician, go to the school counselor, and a lot of those things are probably covered are free through the schools, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So those are great
Yes.
resources to start with. And then you had mentioned earlier, I had went to Scottish Rite Hospital, Children's Hospital is where I was tested.
Mhm.
And like you said, when I went to college, I had to be retested. It probably depends on different areas how long those tests are good for. So that's
Right.
normal. You usually have to get retested to make sure that you're
Right.
still appropriate for the accommodations.
Yes, I had to get retested as an adult. I've never been very impressed with a lot of them because I always think that I go in there and it's a lot of doom and gloom. Like I can remember the last one was I needed to get a ride with their paratransit service, and I had to show I had a disability that I couldn't drive. And I remember going in with them, and I said they were asking questions like, "Okay, so what do you want to do?" So they gave me this test of like, "Okay, what's your dream job?" I said, "Oh, I want to do this. I want to be a caseworker." Or I also put down, "I'd really like to write news articles." And they told me there that based on my scores, we're not even going to include this in the evaluation because that's beyond your capacity. I just find it amazing that I've written articles, I've gotten things published, I've been able to go and do a lot of these things. That's just sometimes I don't think they see the complete picture. They see that I
Yeah.
can't do math very well.
Mm,
They see that my visual perception isn't that great, but
yeah.
and I definitely have hand dexterity issues. We didn't find that out until I was an adult. It's always been on the really low side. And
Yeah.
just sometimes just the attitude's always been on what I couldn't do rather than what I could.
Michelle, I'm the same way. I mean, I've been a physical
Mm-hmm.
therapist now, I don't know, 17 years, and I have all kinds of extra certifications on top of my PT license, and I love what
Mm-hmm.
I do. I've done some cool things in my career, but on paper, I wasn't supposed to pass my test or even get through PT school or get in. I am 100% right there with you. Don't let those tests define you because if
Yeah.
God's got a plan and a purpose and you're praying and you're faithful, God's going to see you through all kinds of things throughout your life. Don't let that stop you. It doesn't mean it's gonna be easy. We had tutors, we had lots of studying,
Mm-hmm.
extra studying. That's okay, it's a part of it. It makes you strong, it makes you goal-oriented and persevere, right?
Exactly. It makes you who you are. Yeah, it
Mm.
makes you stronger. And you have that empathy. I think I was designed to help people. I think that's
Yeah.
something God placed in me. But I
Mhm.
don't know if I would have went through what I went through, would I be as empathetic?
I agree with you because we can be a little cocky, right, and prideful, but, life sort of brings that back down. What does the Bible say? Pride that comes before a fall.
Yes.
These things, these hard things, it makes you humble and it makes you realize I gotta depend on Jesus to help me in every single step of my life. Michelle, anything else you would like to share with us? This is really good information about the testing for kids in school to pursue these different career paths, whatever their goals are.
I would just really encourage people that God has a purpose and a plan for a lot of that pain and a lot of the trauma and just anything that you're going through. God has a plan for that and God has a purpose, and just to give it to Him and He'll provide the rest for you. And that success doesn't always come in the package that you expect. Sometimes it comes in something even better.
Very well said. Tell us the name of your blog because I think that's so great that you started writing and that you have a blog where
Mhm.
people can read, especially on hard days or you're discouraged. You can go on the web and find your blog and just be encouraged by your words.
Sure. The name of my blog is Michelle's Mission, and I write about life with a learning disability. I use a lot of nature metaphors, and I have some flowers on there as well for some flower pictures on my little store.
Is there anywhere on social media that people can find you if they'd like to reach out?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Perfect. I'm gonna put all of the information in the show notes and also some of those resources that we talked about, if that would be helpful for people. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for sharing about your journey of finding your career and going through schooling, overcoming the shame and the
Hmm.
hardship because it's so many kids in this day and age are
Yeah.
going through lots of fears and anxieties, and we just need to remember that God's got huge plans for each child, each person,
Hmm.
even if it's not an easy path.
Exactly.
All right, my friend. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. You don't have to have a learning disability to know what it's like to feel shame, embarrassment, not good enough. Maybe you've had a goal in your life and you're like, I'm never going to achieve that goal. It's way too impossible. It's way too big. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. Or maybe you are a parent that sees a child that's struggling and maybe struggling more than normal. And you're like, what is going on? I hope that this episode today with Michelle was helpful. You're not alone. And maybe some of you didn't even know that I have a learning disability and dyslexia and struggled with that my whole life as a child. Some of you have heard my story about being kidnapped and taken to Jordan. I missed some schooling during that time, if you can imagine. Why would I miss schooling? So at first, my mom thought that maybe that's why I was behind all the childhood trauma that I went through. So maybe that's why it was a little longer until I got tested. But yeah, that shame and that guilt of having to be pulled out of class and going to a special class. I even went to a separate school for some things. I always had wonderful friends. No one ever really called me dumb, but I felt dumb. And oh my gosh, I just died when the teacher would call me up to that board. I didn't want anyone to know that I didn't know how to do those things. I had to count on my fingers or I didn't know how to spell. So if that's you, you're not alone and it is okay. And God's got big plans for you. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." God has big plans in store for you, no matter what your life might look like, no matter what obstacles they look like, no matter what your living situation is, or what your family situation is, or your financial situation. Put your name right in that verse in Jeremiah 29:11. Put your name right there. For I know the plans I have for you, Lauren, says the Lord. Pray it over yourself. Write it down. Put it on your phone. Memorize it. I'm not good at memorizing. That's why I have it written. But say it over your life because those words are so true. And if you need some assistance and some help, I will put some resources in the show notes to try to guide you along the way, or reach out to Michelle. You can reach out to me. I'll try to help you. But I'd love to stop and just pray over each one of you listening today. Father, I thank you so much for Michelle. I thank you that you put her in my life to just know that I'm not alone in my own struggles. And for the person listening, this, hey, I've got the same story. Would you pour your wisdom into them? Would you let them know how much you love them, that you have called them chosen, beautiful, courageous, smart, able? They are able to do abundantly more than they could ever imagine, that you have good plans for their life, that you have a future in store, and that you will provide if they ask, if they pray, if they step out in faith. Father God, I thank you, Jesus, that you walk with us through this life every day. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for joining me on the Redeemed podcast. We have talked about all kinds of topics. We've talked about addictions. We've talked about healing from cancer. We've talked about wounds of mothers and childhood trauma. You can go back to some of the episodes if you've missed any and look at some of the titles and see, hey, that one sounds like something I need to listen to. Or if you'd like to come on the Redeemed podcast as a guest, go to my website, laurenburns.net, and you can fill out a form. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you do me a huge favor? Would you leave me a review? You can leave a review on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And those reviews mean so much to me. It just lets me know I keep putting out these episodes. Or you can even give me some suggestions. I love that too. Any questions that you have, send them my way. Don't hesitate. Seriously, I want to hear from you. I hope you have a fantastic day. Until next time, I'll see you later.